Relax.
I'm supposed to know, yes.
Since you're a professional. Okay.
Okay.
This is Mr. Rakesh Sharma. This is New Delhi, April the 10th. Everywhere I've gone in India, people have talked about your television films as being sort of in the forefront of the new attempt to have documentary reach a wide audience in India, sort of the great hope of Indian television. Maybe you can tell me a little bit how you arrived at this position, your background and your formation.
Well, you know that I studied in Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
I did my initiation into the media, as it was.
Mm-hmm.
Was in Loyola, then was the campus of Concordia University. I did the post-bachelor's diploma in communication arts.
But even before that, you were in the Film Society?
No, I wasn't. Well, I was in North Point in Darjeeling. That's where I studied, and we were very much interested in films. I mean, per se, we were all excited by the film media. You know, the medium as it was, and as a form of expression, as a kind of a medium that would capture social reality. And we had our own film club there, and we watched films by various directors. Obviously, one of them was Satyajit Ray. You know, he was then in his peak, making films in Calcutta and in Bengal, but films that were so universal that we were all touched by it. And it was at that time, even though I did science, I was very much interested in poetry, and I was very interested in writing. And I wanted to take up a media that would be more fulfilling in terms of expression. And I met somebody who told me that television would be the future of India. You know, we didn't have television then, and this was 1970. Mm-hmm. Television was there in Delhi, but it was a very one-station, local broadcast, black and white, almost primitive. Mm-hmm. So this interest in trying to explore a media sent me to Canada, and I was initiated into, I think, a medium which opened a completely new world to me. My interest, as I said, was not just focused on television as a medium of expression in terms of a poet or a writer, but also something that could capture social reality. Ironically, when I came back, I worked with a social organization in Calcutta, Chitrabani, which was trying to demystify the media for the masses. And in many ways, that was a learning experience, because it also brought to me the strength of the medium and the power it had, especially in a country like India. And this was again the formative years of television. Television was for the first time coming into other cities of India. This was 1974-75. Calcutta got its first station during that period. And there was a lot of hope that this particular medium would be the future in terms of communication expansion in the country. And well, I couldn't really cope with the reality of Calcutta in many ways. I was born in the hills in Darjeeling. Kalimpong is my hometown. I studied in Kalimpong, Darjeeling, and my father was in Tibet as a businessman. So we had a lot of close relationship with this exotic Tibetan Buddhist culture. Many of his friends would come over, and I wanted to break out on my own as a filmmaker. And so I tried to do a film, which most of us try to do, in your own backyard. Mm-hmm. I was in Gangtok for a number of years, and I'd find it fascinating, the monasteries there, that all these Tibetan refugees who had come to India. They had founded their own Buddhist monasteries, and they were audiovisual delight. I mean, they were really cinematic. It was almost as if it was everything a filmmaker wanted to do in terms of both the visual medium and the audio medium was there to experiment with. Mm-hmm. The shafts of light, the sounds of the deep sort of chiaroscuro shadowed interiors, and mm-hmm. the golden tankas and ornate costumes and the exotic masks. I mean, every one of these elements was sort of, to me then, very extremely cinematic. So I managed to raise money mm-hmm. to make my first film. I mean, in between my Chitrabani and making this, I was also interested in advertising, mm-hmm. but I got terrified by the sheer superficial nature of advertising. I just couldn't take it, and so I abandoned that, and I said, this is not a profession for me. Even though you'll find in India a lot of young filmmakers take up advertising films as a form of expression, because that's perhaps the only area in which they can make money mm-hmm. and yet fulfill their own urges to self-expression.
Yeah, I've met a lot of people in that situation.
A lot of them do that. Mm-hmm. So it's in Gangtok that I first began then, doing this film on Rumtek Monastery.
This was 16 millimeter?
This was in 35 millimeter, because 16 in India had not really come then. This was 1977, and very ironically, there was no 16 millimeter. Everybody talked about it, but you know, it was also a time where Richard Leacock had just brought out his MIT Super 8. So everybody was thinking about a quantum jump, that India didn't need 16. We'd go straight from 35 into Super 8, and you know, so with the result that we really fell behind times in terms of technology. So it was difficult doing a documentary, especially on location 35, but I wanted to capture the mood of the monastery. I wanted to be as honest to the monastery as possible, and we spent a year doing it in different seasons. I was assisted by one of the finest cameramen in the country then, Subrata Mitra, who was Satyajit Ray's cameraman. Very sensitive artist, a man who could respond to images, who could create the ambience, you know, excellent. A man who was brilliant with light. I mean, he is perhaps one of the greatest lighting cameramen in the world. But for the fact that he's doing his films in India, if he was doing, say, in France or in America, anywhere, he would be recognized as a master. You know, I mean, he comes in the same class as Nick West and Nasser Al-Mandros and, you know, Haskell Wexler, and in that class. So I was very, you know, privileged to have sort of worked with him in my very first film. It was, again, a great learning experience. Roomtek turned out to be a super hit. Mainly because the documentary tradition in India has always been very primitive, so anything that is very professionally made has all these qualities which...
was it feature length?
It was about 40 minutes.
40.
And it was all funded by me with my own resources. I mean, I pledged collateral to the government and got funds from them to make it. So it was really more of a you know, act of bravado, almost you can say a desperate act for somebody who wanted to break out. I was very young then. 25.
And how can a film like that be a hit? You mean it was shown in theaters?
Well, it was a hit in the sense that critically it was acclaimed.
I see.
It won the National Award for the Best Documentary that year in India. It won the Commonwealth Award and Special Jury Award in the first Commonwealth Film and Television Festival, where it was competing against some of the best BBC films and some of the best films from other Commonwealth countries. And it was shown in television all over the world, except in India, because Indian television then was black and white.
So it must have been very frustrating for you to have reached this audience around the world.
And you just couldn't show your own, you know, films to your countrymen. And the films division, which was then the only source of exhibition of documentary films, would accept films only that were 20 minutes long. And I didn't want to cut down my film, because I said if I cut it down to 20 minutes, then it's no longer the same film that won the award. So it was only on a matter of principle that I didn't sell the films. Of course, I recouped the money by selling it to television abroad. I had, in fact, had a screening of this in Loyola. I went back with this film in 1979. I went for a tour in America, universities. There was a lot of Buddhist interest there. And I'd shown the film then in Canada, too. It was in America that I met a producer who was so bowled by the Roomtek documentary. He offered me to, you know, he said, I'd produce a film on Ladakh if you direct it. So I thought he was joking. In any case, I accepted it. I did the film. It was an hour-long film. It was called Drikung, A Faith in Exile. It was about a Tibetan Buddhist sect which was transferring its allegiance from Tibet, which was, of course, then with China, into Ladakh. And we photographed, we documented this rather tragic, but rather, again, very colorful, very exotic happening. Yeah, after that, I sort of was getting tired of Tibetan Buddhism and such. I thought I was repeating myself, and I was looking for fresh avenues of expression. I was again commissioned by a body in America to do some work with them on a series of films on the spread of Hinduism and Buddhism in, you know, into Asia. It was called Realms of Gold. It fell through when Ronald Reagan came to power, because he shot down all the NEH matching grants, and so we were left only with scripts and no money to make the films. So it was then that I again thought I'd pay tribute to my backyard, and I wanted to do a book on Sikkim. I did a book on Sikkim called Images of Sikkim, which was sellout in many ways, in the sense that it's going for a reprint and for a coffee table book, hardcover.
Was that about the time that Sikkim got absorbed into the Republic?
Yes, that was the time. Just in fact, it was the first book after that merger into the Indian Union. It was then again that I began to feel that, you know, it was a time of a kind of a social and economic and political upheaval in the country. The emergency had just ended. There was a lot of freedom in the media. A lot of things were being expressed. There was a political cynicism that was creeping into the social fabric. There was almost a feeling that corruption was becoming, the word, the password into everything. And many of us were reacting to it. It was at that period I decided I wanted to do a film, and I realized I couldn't do it in the documentary form, because what I wanted to say about the manipulation of the media, what I wanted to say in terms of proxy warfare that goes on with politicians, and the importance of the media per se, and how easily it could be manipulated in a situation like in a situation as peculiarly as it is in India, because Indian democracy is a very different kind. It is a democracy, there's no doubt, but it has its own rules of the game. Caste plays a major factor, and a whole lot of others, which for I think foreigners it becomes almost inexplicable. You cannot understand these contradictions, but it is there. These are the traditions with which we have to battle, and I wanted to capture this contradiction. And I knew I couldn't do it in a documentary, because documentary A didn't then have the kind of funding that you could get. B, it couldn't be a commercial hit. I was tired of making films for television abroad. I wanted to reach out to my own people. So I decided the best thing to do would be to make a feature film, with actors and with stories, and that would reach me a bigger audience. And I did a film called New Delhi Times.
Oh, that was there. Okay, I thought that was a more recent film.
Well, it was recent. It took me, some time to do that film. I finished that film in 1985, with many false starts, and the film subsequently, of course, made its place in the Indian cinema, world.
And it's really the only feature you've done.
That's the only feature I did. It was again after New Delhi Times that it was during that period when I made New Delhi Times that television really began its explosion in the country. I mean, it first really began after the Asian Games in '82, but by '85, a concept called the sponsored program was coming into Indian television. But whereby, for the first time, Doordarshan, which is a government-owned media, and so is radio in India, would accept programs by outside producers and sponsor them with advertisement clips before the program. Now that was in many ways a revolution, because everybody realized the power of the media. Suddenly there were 90 million people watching television. There were 200 transmitting stations. Now all this was maybe done for a political motive. They wanted to reach out to their messages to the largest audience, and television with the satellite Insat 1A and 1B was reaching out simultaneously the whole of India. But nevertheless, here was a medium that was coming to life, and we were watching it happening. And the ironical part was, it was at the same time being fused with the image of entertainment of a certain kind. It was almost like a knee-jerk reaction. What I called, if you didn't give people their soap operas and their situation comedies at 9 o'clock, which was the prime time slot, they'd get their withdrawal symptoms. It would be all impossible for anybody to react to any other kind of a program. And I was being horrified, like many of my colleagues. We were being horrified that with this kind of a mediocre staple diet, or this particularly one kind of a diet, there would definitely be malnutrition. That there's no way you'd have a bunch of cretins and illiterates and mentally retarded kids in the next generation. And all of us who have worked in the social field, whether in journalism or whether in writing or in filmmaking, we realized that one of the most important things to create a sense of true democracy, and not just a superficial facade, is to inform the people of what their rights are, inform the people of what the social issues are. And that to me is the first duty of a media like television in India. It is not to entertain.
Of course, the sponsors are not interested in...
And the sponsors are not interested. So we really had to have a major battle. So we fought and we fought and we fought. And we fought on many grounds. We fought in trying to get incentives for serious programs. We fought in trying to get these kind of programs shown on prime time. We fought in trying to convince the bureaucrats that, hey, look, documentary is the staple diet. Non-fiction is the staple diet of television. Entertainment is incidental. So why don't we try and see this? Why don't we change these priorities that you have? And fortunately for me, I had the full support of the Indian Documentary Producers Association and a number of other young filmmakers. And I had built up a credibility by then, because New Delhi Times had won the national award in India. It won the international award in Karlovy Vary. It was talked about a lot. So there was a little bit of credibility factor that helped me in many ways lead this, this agitation. And so they told me that, what are you interested in? I said, okay, I'm interested in an investigative documentary serial. Will you show it in prime time? They said, okay, what would it be called? So I said, okay, I'll call it Insight. And it would be an insight into various factors, into the mental asylums, into drug abuse, into coal mafia. We had a lot of ambitious plans then. But there was nobody willing to take it as sponsored program. Because sponsors were looking for the lowest common denominator. They were interested in the largest audience, viewership. They were not interested in a program that would be watched by a minority whose tastes had not yet been cultivated, in fact, whose tastes had been corrupted. And it was being corrupted more and more every day. Now that was to me, that was a tragedy, because it was almost as if we were, losing out in everything that we had stood out. I mean, it was almost, we felt for a while that it would be perhaps better if they stopped television in the country. That the long-term impact, the harm that would be done over the years would be terrible, and it would be irreparable. So it was then again that I decided, okay, if you want it, one sponsor told me that we'd take it if you do it in Hindi, because they found out that a Hindi program with its lowest audience ratings still gathers more audience, more viewership than the best English language program, which means the highest rating of an English language program is less than half of the worst Hindi language viewership.
It's not really surprising, actually.
Well, it is not, but again, for many of us who were sort of trained into speak in English and study in English, it was kind of difficult transition. We took the challenge. We said, okay, and that was when we decided to do Kasauti. Now, Kasauti, of course, was a milestone because it was the first documentary serial we put on prime time.
This was 1980?
This was 87.
7.
Towards the end of 87, November 87. And we were very pleasantly surprised when the response we got to a documentary serial was far above what we thought it would. In the Hindi belt, the viewership ratings which the advertising agency sent me, in fact, it was not our study, it was their independent study, it was about 50%, which meant that the overall Indian rating, because in the south, because of Hindi, the ratings were very low. In Madras, it was only 6%. In Calcutta, it was around 16%. Bombay, it was around 40%. But in Delhi, it was above 50, 54 and 60%. That was the average viewership, which meant that we were almost gathering, on an average, 38 to 40% of 90 million viewers every day. And that, for a documentary, I think, was incredible. Now, I know it was because it was shown on 9 o'clock. It was a prime time, and people had this, they were all addicted to watching almost like a reflex action documentary. But nevertheless, it made it high profile. It also ensured that people began to realize that a documentary could be in the program mix of the television thing. Now, subsequently, a lot of documentary programs are on the pipeline, and so in as much as that goes, we feel that we've been vindicated.
Focus, this series in English, came after that? Or?
Well, it was during that period that I also was, my basic interest has always been in current affairs. I've always thought of myself as a media person. I'm not a filmmaker, I'm not a television person. I like to write, I like to express myself with words, with any form of media that's possible. And to me, I thought that television, the secondary strength of television, rather the primary strength, non-fiction we call it, but the primary strength is current affairs. And in fact, in Kasauti also, most of the subjects that we took up were almost current affairs subjects. We were taking social issues, but we were analyzing it on a journalistic manner. And I was then offered by Doordarshan that, look, why don't you do a program for us? If you're so interested and you can't find sponsors, we will sponsor you. And there was this current affairs primetime program called Focus, which I said, okay, I'll take up, and I did to date I've done 10 subjects with them, 10 half an hour slots. We've done two programs on Darjeeling. One was done early, and then we did an update. We did a program on India's nuclear challenge, where we talked about the development of whether India should go for a nuclear bomb and whether India should go for peaceful uses of nuclear energy. And we had the pros and cons of that. Then we did a program on the Reliance Cup, which was a cricket carnival that was held in the World Cup of Cricket, which was held in sometime November 87. We did a program on Sati, which was a very, it was an incident that took place in near Jaipur, in a village near Jaipur, about I think October And
we talked about balance as an issue rising from the film we just looked at, Darjeeling, with a subject as controversial as sati, where you must have very strong personal feelings. Was it difficult to...
Well, we couldn't really, I don't think that certain subjects I don't think demand a balance. I think certain subjects only demand an analysis. So at the most what you can do is you can put across a viewpoint of certain people, however perverted it may be, only to support the kind of give it a rationale for the program being made. I don't think you can balance it. There's no way you can debate that. Right. Because that would almost be like, like saying that let's try to debate with a drug addict why he really thinks that heroin is the best thing it can be, because it gives him that kick, and it gives him that, in a world of poverty, in a world of drudgery, he finds that he gets his relief in it. I mean, it'd be as perverse as that. So I think in as much as those subjects like sati, one goes with a very strong editorial viewpoint, but one tries to analyze why it happens. One doesn't try to give it the merit of it or the demerits of that issue. And that is what the approach in our program on sati it was. The analysis of why such a thing could happen in modern India.
Was the nuclear issue one of the...
That was balanced, yes. That was pros and cons. Because there you had people who were anti-nuclear lobby, who was very strong proponents, who came out with all their arguments. And I had the other lobby which said that no, in a country like India, this was the cheapest energy. And then, of course, when it came to the bomb section, it was in terms of geopolitical balances and what happens across the border with Pakistan. And the consensus, of course, there was that if Pakistan goes for the bomb, we go for the bomb. That was the pro-bomb lobby. And the other lobby simply said that it's insane. I mean, just because somebody else is insane, you shouldn't, join that race on insanity. That's self-destructive in any way. And then, of course, we also did a program on, some very soft subjects, what we call things like tourism and environment. What the impact of tourism on environment. And how
in general, I gather you are much more comfortable with very, very strong subjects, though.
I think that is perhaps the strength. I think most filmmakers would react that way. I mean, most of us tend to sort of find that when you really have a strong subject, then you are reacting to it from the guts. You're reacting. You can get into the heart of the matter very easily. I mean, unlike a program like Contemporary Indian Painting, where you just have to actually give an overview and not really enter into any kind of a. You don't need to take a position. I think a documentary filmmaker somewhere has to take a position. He can come out balanced. He must project all viewpoints. But if it's a social issue, A, by the choice of a subject, he's taken a stand. B, I think even the way he treats the subject shows his bias.
Normally a government-controlled television system doesn't encourage personal stands, though, does it?
No, I agree with you, and in fact that's one of the frustrations we live in. I mean, if it was, if I was doing most of these documentaries for television abroad or for private channel or for my own consumption, and I didn't have to worry about certification or viewership, or I had access to a media by which I could show it, I don't think, if you read, for instance, the Indian newspapers, you'd find the same thing analyzed there in much more stark terms. But I also think, I'm beginning to realize now that television has a lot more responsibility also. One can't really go and treat television as a tabloid medium. It's very easy to sensationalize in television. It can be it's very much easier to, horrify. In fact, there's a lot of criticism by many of my friends who say that you take up a social issue and you don't make it stark enough. Of course, one of the reasons is because we've got, as I said, the government control, and they are very sort of vigilant as to what goes in and what comes out of the television box. But apart from that, I think even if I was allowed a lot of freedom, I think there would be an innate sense of responsibility I'd like to bring in. Because I am not a hysterical kind of a person. I don't want to exhibit hysteria. I don't want to take up a stand and just see it in terms of, let's put it this way, I'm not an activist. I don't consider myself an activist. I just consider myself as somebody who's got sympathy for the marginal people, somebody who likes to put the magnifying glass for a little while on a problem so that that problem gets accentuated, it gets highlighted, people notice it. It is not my job to create a movement for anything. There are other people who do that in society. I'm just like a journalist who writes a piece today and writes another piece tomorrow. I have my bias, I have my stand, I have my sympathies, I have my causes, but I don't want to go overboard on those causes. And that, I think, is a very important aspect in television. Otherwise, you will not be in that medium. You have to then be outside the medium. And there are a lot of filmmakers who are doing that. And, you know, I mean, great work they're doing. But that is not my style.
Can you give me an example of some of the areas where you've had to face vigilance on the part of...
Well, most of the vigilance is when you criticize government institutions. You know, for instance, we did programs on destitute women, talking about remand homes and what tragic situation there was. I mean, there's always that first knee-jerk reaction that, look, if you've talked about how terrible this thing is, why don't you talk to the minister and give a justification, because so much is being done for the women in this country. Now, I react very strongly to certain things like that, because I feel, as I said, that everything should not be balanced, because this is an obvious case of oppression, what takes place. And anything that would come from a government would only be an apology. It would only amount to being saying that, okay, we are looking into the matter, you know, we are seized of the matter, or whatever it is, these cliches. Now, I don't think that would in any way help a program like that. In Kasauti, I almost avoided doing that. And I was, frankly, supported a great deal by a very liberal stand taken by some of the senior officials, you know. Otherwise, I don't think I would have been able to take Kasauti through. Even in Kasauti, I had to make a lot of compromises because the sponsors didn't want too many serious subjects. So I had to take in innocuous subjects like, you know, the Indian film, the new Indian cinema, or the circus people, you know, and talk about these issues which I thought wouldn't really be the purview of a serial like Kasauti. I would much rather talk about child labor, or I'd rather talk about old age, or I'd talk about, you know, prostitution.
What kind of sponsors do you get for Kasauti? Are they just the usual toilet?
Well, yes, Kasauti was sponsored by people who, you know, it was co-sponsored. One of the sponsors was manufacturing Vicks vapor up here, Richardson Hindustan Limited. They bring out Vicks cough drops and vapor up, and, you know. And the other one was some shaving cream, Wiltec. I think it was not a shaving cream, shaving blade, I think. And, well, I mean, to us it didn't really matter, because the very fact that they were sponsoring it was itself a welcome thing.
I think you're more successful at it than some of our filmmakers in Canada at finding sponsors. Maybe we can talk a little bit more detail about the 2 or 3 programs I've seen. For example, the one on mental illness. I saw maybe the first program and then half of the second one. Could you talk about how you went about making those 2
well,
programs?
you know, as when it came to the mental health program, it was a very conscious decision on our part that it would be very easy for us to try to sort of sensationalize the program. You know, we could have easily got the program in a manner that one would think it was a voyeuristic kind, and we wanted to avoid that, because the major reason why we were doing a program on mental health was to try and show the amount of callousness that is there in society toward the mentally ill people, and how little we know about the definition of what is mentally ill, and how terribly outmoded most of our mental asylums were. That was one aspect. The other aspect also was, of course, that in India, it's a society which works from the rural to the urban. It's a very complex society. And mental institutions and mental health care normally focus on only one aspect of the society, which is the urban society. The rural society finds its own avenues. When they don't find that avenue, they migrate into the urban areas. And we wanted to capture that aspect also. And because we were dictated by the 30-minute slots we had for documentary, we decided to do it in 2 parts. Part 1 would be an expose into the world of the mental health, into the trauma of most of what families go through, into the expose of institution itself. So what we decided to research a little, and we took the help of a lot of newspaper people, and I had some associate producers who worked with me on a television program. And we decided that we'd work in teams, where one of us would go into one asylum, the others would go into another asylum, and whoever would be able to get the best material, then we'd collate it and make it on the editing table. During this period, I was also doing a documentary on land reforms in Bihar, which is really one of the more backward states, and there's a lot of problems that take place there. And I'd become quite friendly with the Home Secretary, the man there, and he was very sympathetic to our attitude towards the particular program that we were doing, the land reform program, and he was a great fan of my feature film, New Delhi Times, which he considered one of the bold films that he'd seen. So because the major mental asylum in India was situated in Ranchi, where cameras are not allowed to enter into the asylum, I requested him. I said, look, this is coming on Doordarshan. Anything that's sensational will be cut out. You know that. Just let me go in and expose what is happening there, because it will help you in the long run. You know, I mean, after all, if you're a sympathetic bureaucrat, you would like your own institutions to be taken care of by the people who are there in charge. You wouldn't want, you know, you can't really do a day-to-day supervision. And here is a chance for you to really get something from us on a national hookup, which would give you an excuse to intervene if there are any acts of sin, you know, omissions or commissions. And he was very sympathetic and he allowed us to do that. So I sent a camera team in, and they managed to sort of document a lot of things that you saw, including people who've been falsely put in the asylum, who are not really insane, or people who've been abandoned, or people who are, you know, so callous because of the health and the hygiene and all those aspects. Again, as I said, that was one aspect to the whole thing, and the other aspect was the indiscriminate use of things like ECT, the tremendously absence of any sensitivity towards the mental patients. Now, all this formed the purview of the first program.
How long were you shooting in the institution?
Well, overall, I think we did the shooting we did for 10 days of shooting, the whole area for the part 1 of the program. But then there was a part 2 to the program, where we wanted to talk about traditional forms of healing. You know, the use of shamans and use of witch doctors, they are called. I mean, that's it's a wrong translation actually. They are basically just a medium through which people bring out their emotions. They are the traditional psychiatrists of society. You know, and many of the psychologists in the country were beginning to realize that these psychiatrists and these shamans were faith healers, were actually the primitive form of psychoanalysis, which is a very traditional form. And in the absence of medicine, in the absence of clinical doctors, in the absence of asylums, they played a very important role. And they couldn't just be, you know, condemned as superstition, because in many ways, mental health was linked to the cultural reality of the society. And one, you know, because most of us have a little bit of Western education, we tend to see these things with a little condescension. We tend to see these things with a little bit of certain amount of disdain. And I was realizing when I was making the program that for them, that was the reality. It was not my reality. It was the reality of this villager who believed that she was possessed of a ghost, and she was exorcising the ghost, where actually what it was a psychological trauma that she was exorcising. And because of the stigma attached with mental health, it was easier to convince her that she was possessed of something from outside that could be exorcised out. And therefore she would be then pure and clean again. So we took this aspect in the second part, and then we went into the Ayurvedic healing. And the third aspect, which of course I don't think you saw, which is an institution in Bangalore called Nimhans, where mental health treatment is being taken from the asylum to the villages. Instead of getting all these villagers crowding the asylums, the healthcare program was using the existing grid of the medical professionals, training them into mental health identifications of the mental health problems, and then spreading it out into the villages. Now, this to me was a very novel thing, and we therefore tried to balance it. Part 1 showing the expose of what could be disaster, part 2 trying to show that there was a way out, and there were people who were making an effort towards this way out. And this basically was, you know, how we sort of went ahead and did the program. It was very well received. In fact, it was a program with one of the highest ratings, and a program that was perhaps been written most about.
Did you feel any frustrations making this kind of a film on a tight television schedule? And
well, yes, that is true. I mean, that's one of the things that we tried to sort of, we couldn't really get the depth that we wanted, maybe, if you know, suppose, and because television is a medium which is a deadline medium, you know. So in that sense, it was a little frustrating. But I think that was also, in many ways, it was a challenge. In many ways, it was also really beneficial because it didn't allow us to relax. We were constantly on the move, and we really managed to sort of get nearly everything we wanted. I personally don't think if I redo the film, I'd do anything different. Even if I had more time to myself. Maybe I'd make a longer film, but certainly it would have the same elements to it.
You had, what, about 2 months to do the
whole
parts?
thing, both the parts.
Amazing.
Yes, but then I work with a big team also, because I have a lot of people who help me. Like, as I said, my associate producers, we work out a kind of a rough edit, and then they take care of the editing for a while, and then I come back and then we work on it again. So it's a great teamwork, and I work a lot with my cameraman, because I let my cameraman do a lot of work also. They work very closely with me, and we brief them, because documentary, you cannot direct a cameraman on location. At the most you can do is have a very strong brief and ensure the cameraman is your extension. And that's why I normally like to work with the same cameraman in each one of my films. The whole Kasauti serial was shot with only 2 cameramen who worked with me all of the episodes.
So you have an unspoken understanding.
Because otherwise it becomes very difficult for me too.
You said that you were concerned about the danger of voyeurism. So how would you and the cameraman sort of deal with that as you were?
Well, in fact, one of the things that I still regret in the program is 1 or 2 places where the cameraman went for a very wide angle and very close, and there's a little bit of distortion. Now, to me, that was unacceptable. Unfortunately, the shots were the only ones we had, so we used it.
These are people looking right into the lens?
Into the lens. Now, I don't like that kind of a thing, personally. I feel that ethically, if the person was normal, I wouldn't mind. But here was a mental patient, and as it is, there was an abnormality in the person. I don't mind even the person looking straight into the lens. What I objected to was the use of the wide angle, which distorted the person a little bit and added a little more sinister quality to the whole frame. Now, probably it works cinematically in terms of evoking an emotion, but I object to that kind of an use. I find that is an exploitation of a situation where I think one should be a little more objective and get back and let the situation just be as it is, and you just document it.
Was there any criticism of those parts?
No, very surprisingly, very few people noticed it, but I suppose because we were so conscious of what we were trying to do, I think many of us debated it more on the editing table here than it was done by others.
I also wondered about those shots, and I was very curious about how you operate around the issue of consent. I mean, how you
Yeah, that's another area where we sort of we had a lot of debate among ourselves, But I feel that in the documentary filmmaking of social issues, I personally feel that sometimes you have to intrude into people's privacy for a larger cause. I can't say to myself that, look, these people are insane, and therefore I should not be doing anything with them. I'm exploiting them. Yes, there is an element of exploitation, I agree. But then I see it in the larger context. If what I'm trying to do in the long run is going to help every one of them, and that is what the whole purpose of this was, to bring about a little bit of an awakening. And I don't see any reason, any harm in taking such an attitude. On the other hand, suppose I was exploiting it, as I said, in order to only create a very voyeuristic picture which would have no analysis, which would have no depth in it, and it would only be a series of images strung together with music. In fact, if you notice the films, we had no music. Because I don't want to use those elements in this kind of a documentary. There was enough starkness as it was in the subject matter itself. And all I was trying to do was analyze the situation. And that's the only reason I went with them. The same thing happened with the program, which unfortunately you didn't see, on drug abuse among children.
I saw a little bit of it.
The parents, they're fighting with, there's a fight between the husband-wife and what was responsible.
I was actually in a restaurant in Trivandrum and saw this on television.
And we had a lot of, I was criticized then by my own crew members for having taken that shot. Now, I believe that was very strong, because I believe that I was doing nothing wrong in it. I was not intruding into their privacy, because in many ways that was one of the ways of trying to show the pure horror of drug abuse among children. And I had no exploitation. I used that image for what it was, with an analysis.
I wondered when I saw that, in fact, I'm so glad I did see that particular part. I wondered whether those people were very aware of the media.
No, probably they were not aware of the media, but they were certainly aware that we were not there as peeping toms into their privacy, that we were genuinely concerned about what was happening to their son. You know, and they were reacting with us. They were sharing with us that concern.
As I remember, it was also held very long, wasn't it?
We allowed the whole scene to play its duration, you know, as it went. I mean, what happened in real time.
Is this a principle that you try to adhere to a lot in
Yes.
the editing?
When it comes to this kind of a situation, where there is an intense emotional situation, I don't want to intrude into it. You know, then I am playing with, you know, I'm then manipulating it. But I allow it to play in real time.
Do you face any pressure from the network to pick up the pace sometimes in the editing, or?
Well, not really. In fact, it is not the network; it is the sponsors who
Yes.
get you into this kind of a, you know. And I think in Kasauti we did pick up the pace a lot. In fact, a lot of people who do documentary films abroad and who saw the program too were saying that we were too fast-paced. But then we were competing with situation comedies and soap operas for that audience.
Yes.
So we had to make sure that we went at a brisk pace, you know, more than I would have done perhaps if I was doing it as an independent documentary.
Is there also pressure to use music or commentary?
Oh yes, a lot. But then television is a spoken medium. Whatever people may say, I mean, it is not like the big screen. The big screen is a medium for images. Television is a verbal medium. I mean, that's full stop. You know,
Can you elaborate a little bit on that? I mean, what is your thinking about commentary and sound?
I think there's nothing wrong in using commentary in television. I think that is what it is essentially it is, because people who are seeing it need to be talked a lot. I mean, in fact, you see television anywhere in the world, unless, as I said, there's a situation like you have, you know, which is a documentary situation, something raw happening. It's a war scene, or it's something happening in front, something dramatic happening in front of the camera. Cinema verite, you're capturing reality. If it is in any other form, television is always spoken words, which you don't get on a big screen. A big screen, the image can be so overpowering, that the strength of the image is so strong that you can play with just music and get away with it. A television audience doesn't have that kind of attention span. He or she is forever doing something else while watching it, and words play a very important role there.
But there are different kinds of words. I mean, there's a voiceover commentary à la films division.
Oh, well, that's different. I mean,
there's also
well, no, when I'm talking about words, I don't mean to say it's a pompous medium, or it's a words where words are being used in a superficial, you know, manner and embellishment. I'm talking about it's an analytical medium. You can analyze a lot. I mean, in fact, if you see, say for instance, we see the great television serials like The Ascent of Man, you know, or you see Civilization, or you see Cosmos, so you see any one of these television serials, and or even if you see the serial on the Vietnam War, or you see a serial called The Soldiers, you know, the Friedrich Forsyth BBC serial, notice what I'm talking about. In fact, like, look at the current affairs programs. It's all there. It's the news programs. They all have spoken words in the narration. They have interviews.
I suppose there's more room for experimentation with all of that with independent documentary filmmakers
yes.
rather than on television.
Because television is also a very, I mean, it is, because it's government controlled, because it reaches out to such a large audience, it's also a very conservative medium. You know, when you are doing independent work, you tend to experiment much more. You can be much more, the word I would like to use, irreverent. You know, you cannot be that. You cannot take that stand on television. Again, the question of responsibility comes in. You tend to be, you know, you don't want to offend a lot of sensibilities, because the spectrum of people who are watching is by large the majority, and the majority tends to always have, in any country, very conservative viewpoints. You know, at least towards television, they wouldn't want to be. Again, it's a question of censorship. You might show the same film on the screen, might have all kind of other scenes. The moment it comes to television, you would have a different kind of censorship. This is as true of a Western country as it is for India, and in fact, even more so in India, I think.
So, you've sort of resigned yourself to this and feel that you're within those limits, being
as honest as I can be to the subject matter, to what I'm trying to say.
Where do you see this series going in the future? Are you?
Well, Kasauti, I think I've done my work. I think it's up to other filmmakers to take up. I mean, I think it was a very excruciating battle. It was a painful. I spent 2 years of my life trying to put it on air, and I think I'd like to do something else. In fact, this year I'm doing a fairly light series. I'm doing a series of films as a homage to Indian filmmakers. So it's called Portrait of an Indian Film Director, which would be kind of a tribute to the 75 years of Indian cinema, where I take some of the great directors, and each episode is a documentary on their work and their contribution to Indian cinema.
So it might have the effect of increasing the audience that these people sometimes missed in their own.
Yes,
careers.
and most of the filmmakers I've chosen are the great legends. So
you always shoot on video for your television
I
work.
used to, but now yes, I'm shooting for television. I shoot in video because of the fact that in Delhi you don't have any labs. I'm shooting in films. I have to be in Bombay. Now, unfortunately, I don't like Bombay. It's a neurotic city for me. I can't take the pace of Bombay, and I prefer Delhi, living in Delhi. And again, the instant nature of the medium, deadline nature of television, video is the only answer to me.
So, what is your sense of the special potential of video?
Well, we have a problem in India because in India we work on low band. All over the world it's high band. Even though we work 3/4 inch U-matic, it's still low band. It's a very stupid kind of a decision taken by the government. We're paying the price for it. So the result that technically we maybe not as great as some of the films made abroad. Number one. Number two, we don't have time code here, so it's much more laborious. Everything that we document has to be sort of logged by a person, by an assistant editor or production executive, and it's really a lot of paperwork that goes in, paper editing, paper planning that goes in when we edit. So in as much as those things are concerned, it's really a handicap. But I don't know, I don't find video in fact I find it a much more exciting medium because you see your results instantly. You get a greater scope of exposing much more tape than you would do in film. And it's a very portable medium.
I suppose in India, where there are so many restrictions on film
Exactly.
stock.
Stock and also labs. Where are the labs?
Yes.
Excepting for the major cities like Bombay, Madras, Bangalore, Hyderabad. Even Bangalore, I don't know if has any great labs. It's only Madras, Hyderabad, Trivandrum, and not even Trivandrum, actually. Hyderabad, Madras, and Bombay, and Calcutta.
So you don't feel any nostalgia for the film?
Oh, I'd love to, but then I think I would make a different kind of a film if I was doing it if I do another documentary on film, it would be in 16. It would certainly not be in 35 any longer.
You think 16mm has sort of reached a kind of maturity now?
Yes, it has, but it's still, again, the post-production facilities are still not here. Very few post-production facilities, very few good cameras in 16 in the country, and very little good lab work being done on 16. So we're still rather primitive when it comes to 16, and I think it's remarkable how many of us still manage to make films.
It is, and there's some excellent work being done, and it all really just started about 10 years ago, didn't it?
In fact, documentary, we still don't have a documentary tradition. I mean, Films Division can talk a lot about all the great things they've done, but they've really been responsible for killing whatever little interest there was with the average person in documentary. I mean, everybody today thinks of documentary only as a Films Division product and turns themselves off totally.
It's a terrible burden to have to overcome.
Yes, it is. That's why I've never made a film for Films Division to date.
They're in trouble though now, aren't they? With the
I hope they fight them out. I mean, they have to be wound up. There is nothing that Films Division is. Films Division began at a time when it played a very crucial role of informing the people about what the government was trying to do or what the great plans were, or as a kind of an Indian newsreel which would reach out to the masses through the cinema halls. All that is now being taken over by television. It has a much larger audience.
Does it?
Yes, 90 million.
So
No feature film gets that.
One in 9 Indians sees television.
Yes. It's incredible, absolutely, the power of television and the reach of television. So Films Division is redundant. It's only good as an archival source, and that's all it should be. Let them document everything on film for archival purposes.
Is this going to happen, or do they have enough?
Well, I think it'll happen ultimately. There are going to be some enlightened bureaucrats who are going to see through this sham films division is.
Not everyone I've met has as much faith in enlightenment in the bureaucracy as you
No,
do.
but I feel that ultimately it happens, you know. I mean, it takes time, but
Okay, well, I've covered most of the areas I've been very interested in looking at your work. Would you
no,
feel
I think
anything
I'm absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. Nice talking to you.
Same here. I'll just wind it back a little bit and make sure that
You've got something.